everyone, and welcome to week 12 of Fortune Management's Practice Recovery Acceleration Program. This is the final week of our program, and I'm Jennifer Chevalier, and joined here with my partner, Kim McGuire. Hey, Kim.
Hey there. Great to see you.
And we definitely want to be the first to congratulate you in overcoming this crisis. We know this journey was not expected, as most crises aren't, and we want to first and foremost acknowledge you for not only how you survived through this, but truly how you're thriving. We're getting reports from all over the country about just record months and the bounce back of dentistry as a whole, but specifically as our Fortune clients, seeing them come back into play and really going through the tools and the training that we've all been exposed to at our time with Fortune and putting it all to the test. It's been amazing to watch every one of you excel in so many different areas. And we are really, really proud to have been your partners through this. It's not okay just to have advisors when things are going good, but you need to have your support team for especially during times like this when things aren't going according to plan. And I think you'd all agree that we all came together and have really come through the other side. So in today's segment, we're going to do some review, but we're also going to kind of put a bow on everything that you've learned over the last 12 weeks and really make sure that your focus for the future and wrapping up 2020 is really laser focused on your goals. So during the last 12 weeks, we've really challenged you to excel in 3 roles or 3 different hats that you wear as a practice owner. And to move through a crisis, leaders need to cultivate 4 behaviors in themselves and in their teams. And we talked about this back in, I believe it was around week 5, believe it or not. As leaders, you must decide that speed over precision. So this was a part of going back into your clinical mode of, hey, I may not have all the answers, but I have enough to feel good, and I need to get back. So we know that as time continues, there's going to be more instances where I've got to move quickly versus perfection. And as a really good leader in a time of crisis, you have to be okay with that. Secondly, you have to adapt boldly. That's going to continue to happen as things are changing rapidly and things are being worked out and figured out. Your ability to adapt as a leader and help your team adapt with you is very, very crucial. The third is reliably deliver. It's not okay to just say what we're going to do. We've got to walk our talk, and we have to deliver on what we say we're going to do. And last is engaging for impact, making sure that the roles that we play really is not just a micro decision. We're making macro decisions here that are for not only you as the practice owner and the CEO, but for your team that you're leading and for the patients that you serve and even the community of patients that you haven't touched yet. So engaging in all of those elements for an ultimate impact. Now that the continuing education is over, it is time to really step boldly into these roles of leader and CEO. I think you would agree that majority of the dental industry really focused on that clinical director role, neglecting some of the leadership and the CEO hats. And that is where the separation of ordinary and extraordinary really happens. And we know, you being a part of Fortune, you are choosing to be extraordinary, which means your emphasis on that leadership and the CEO role is going to be really critical. So let's go into leadership for a minute. Everything that we learned over the past 12 weeks was really about crisis management, or in other words, change management. And you have to understand change management. I understand that. But are we managing the change, or are we leading through the change? And at Fortune, we really want to focus on change leadership, which is often overlooked. Effective change leadership is about the pace and phases of change and the emotions associated with them. We took a lot of time to go over the beliefs and the mindsets that you as a leader harnessed, and also what practices and behaviors helped your people to adopt to the change. So in some cases, you may have sat down with your team and said, you know, what is the fear that you have about this certain situation? What's holding you back? What makes you feel unsafe? We also challenged you to then go to your patients and maybe asking those same questions. Change management is more of an outside-in process. You're looking on the structures and the systems, whereas change leadership is really from the inside out, the part of meeting the change challenge. So about enlisting people in change and keeping them committed throughout in the face of uncertainties and fears and distractions is really what we're all about. And those of you that saw that transformation with your team, where you could focus less on the doing and more on the being, I believe you have stood the test of time and are really seeing that work pay off. That is not going to change. You need to continue that. It's really about strengthening the relationships that you have with the team that you have in place. Some of you may have a newer team or a smaller team or just a different team in general. That strengthening relationship, you don't just start at 100%. You've got to build it over time and creating this trusting environment. So some of the things that we saw in our insight to how leadership really supported you during this crisis was understanding the power of caring through a crisis. You know, understanding that people on our team, as well as our patients, they were experiencing all different things during this time. And the amount of empathy and care that you demonstrated really helped that. The support of your team. You know, this is a time to really acknowledge and recognize, and really what I'm doing right now, I'm acknowledging you guys for the work that you've put in and the people that you've become during this. We had a quote that was used a couple times that said, crisis like this only makes you more of who you are. Well, if you're really happy with the person that you turned out, I think that's awesome. Know that you have the power to change that as well. If you haven't been who you've wanted to be over this time, take this moment to make the change to say, who do I ultimately want to be? I've had this conversation with other clients. If they don't like who they're showing up as at work or at home, write down the list of things that your coach can help you be accountable for to say, I want to be this person. And that's how we'll get it done. Engage and motivate in a new sense of purpose. We know that when you came to Fortune or came to us, you had a set of vision and goals and things that you wanted to achieve. This whole period in time could have altered that, and that's okay. It's our job now to get refocused on what does that vision look like right now, and are we crystal clear, and is the team crystal clear? It's really important that if you've changed the game plan on them, that they be a part of that process to understand, because we don't want to have moving targets. So how can we also multiply our impact? How can we think bigger? And what new empowering beliefs do we want to adopt at this stage? Kim, is there anything you would add, things that you're seeing from your end with clients that, you know, as far as that changing vision, we're seeing that quite a bit. What are you seeing there?
Well, we are also seeing, yes, people shifting their vision, maybe reprioritizing what's most important to them in life. This whole reset gave people a chance to do that. And like you said, I'm seeing people with having record months and really being able to step into practicing again. And it's not without some fears and misgivings from some team members and some patients. So they also have to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was last week when in week 11, we went over the changing core values, right? So this was a period of time where we realized that maybe our priorities have changed. Maybe things that were important to us prior are no longer important to us now. How does that affect how we do our business and what our relationships are with everybody? Moving to the role of a CEO, these are some things that we also observed in you. Understanding that change is inevitable, but growth is optional. You saw this as an entire whole in dentistry as an industry, that it changed on its head pretty rapidly. And the ability to adapt and get back into business truly was optional. Whether they grew and decided to do whatever they needed to do or whatever it takes to get back, only a small portion of the industry actually did that. And I also have to say that, you know, dentistry, going back to what we're grateful for, dentistry, if you've gone out and you're in a market where the restaurants are reopened or hotel industry is reopened, talk about a whole new, like, fish out of water experience for them. They didn't know what PPE was. They didn't know how to wear a mask for 8 hours a day. You know, some of those things, while we have definitely experienced change in dental, I would venture to say it's not nearly as much as some of the other industries that are still working on adapting and getting used to the change. Second thing as a CEO is you have taken the helm, so stay there. I would say don't lose the momentum that you've worked so hard over the last 12 weeks to cultivate, and keep that acceleration. Protect the practice reputation. This is going to be really, really important. This is about controlling the narrative, which we've talked about several times, in that things are going to happen outside of your doors, but you've got to set that message inside the doors that eventually does get out. As that patient engagement conversation comes into play, what has our culture been calibrated to make sure the messaging that we have everywhere is consistent and people are saying what we want them to say about us? You know, if we don't give them the story, they make one up, right? So making sure that you are that culture keeper, but you're also the reputation defender. So being selfless, you know, the leaders and the CEOs that really took a stance to say, my patients come first, my practice and team come first, and coming from a place of total abundance as a team, not even just you as the CEO, although it starts with you as the CEO. So putting your best foot forward and leading by example will help everyone around you harness that same attitude. The last two, practice radical transparency. This is something that we've talked about, radical truth and radical transparency. And this is not something that is just attained in one day. This is something that is constantly cultivated, and you've got to practice that again as a leader, as a true CEO. You need to demand that of your team, but you do that by starting with yourself. If there are things that need to be talked about very honestly as a team, that expectation is set from you. Becoming a developer of people. We see that the strong CEOs are really taking an interest in learning about their people, about their team, who is really their shining examples and their stars who also need an acknowledgement during this last 12 weeks. Are people doing what they love to do? Is this a time where we're moving some people on the bus into a different seat and seeing them excel in different ways? And obviously, last but certainly not least, practice communications, and not just communication, but quality communication. This is the time to get back to doing your reality checks, your quality requests, your quality responses. That has never been more important than it is today. And you can see, you turn on the media or any other type of public-facing communication, and you can point out where quality communication lacks and where some maybe poor communication, knowing that every communication that we have either pushes people away or pulls them in towards us. We must remember this. Kim, anything you would add on this as their role as a CEO?
No, I thought you did a beautiful job. Just communicating elegantly is always very important, and actually goes into the clinical director hat. The clinical director hat, the one that you're usually most comfortable with, is important to bring in this communication, and we'll talk a little bit about that on this slide. One of the things that we know is that the CDC just came out last week with some updated information, which you all can look at. Of course, you want to make sure that you're following your state's guidelines. However, you know, they're coming out with information all the time. We also know that MIT came out with a study that said that dentistry is safe to go to, which of course we all knew that. It's always wonderful to get at one of the top universities in the country to say that as well. So it's really about you trusting that you've done a great job with your physical environment, with your PPE, knowing that your ear is to the ground, always improving on your physical environment and making sure that it's completely safe. staying on top of what must be done, and making sure also that you are bringing in any other technology into your clinical world that will help the patients get their dentistry done safer or quicker. That all of that is really, really important. We have getting back to communication, we have a few questions here that it might be great for you to start asking yourself and your team. What does my team need in order to feel safe? Wanting to check in with people all the time and making sure that they're feeling safe and that you're acknowledging any ways that they might not be feeling safe. And then of course, what do my patients need in order to feel safe? And we have been talking a lot about in the last couple of weeks of engaging our patients in helping them feel safe. And then of course, maybe getting some video testimonials and having them really communicate to the outside world how safe it really did feel for them. And always remembering that you were trained for this, you were built for this. You've been, as Jennifer mentioned, wearing PPE and dealing with infection control your whole entire career. This is not any different. It might be up another notch. However, were we always communicating that to our patients? Maybe not. So now is the time to do that. And then of course, lastly, but ask yourself, what do I need in order to feel safe and secure? That's always important as well. And then how do I communicate that in a way that empowers their needs? So again, getting back to acknowledging our team, acknowledging our patients, and making sure that they're feeling safe and you're communicating that, because it's just like sometimes with maybe oral cancer screening or other things that we do that we don't really communicate to the patients unless we're trying to show some more value. We forget to communicate that. This is, it's always important to communicate this, and this time is no different. What you're doing to keep people safe so that they can realize that coming to your practice is much safer than going to a lot of other places in the community. Would you add anything to that, Jennifer?
I think this is a good time. I mean, we've had a lot of practices talk about PPE fees, right? And this is one where the clinical director role really meets your marketing director role, because something like a PPE fee that is there to help, you know, justify some of the costs that you've had to make as a business owner to invest in their safety, if we're not doing an outstanding job at showing them and explaining to them the extensive work that has been done to invest in the practice and literally into their safety, then that fee could be perceived as a fee and not necessarily an investment in their own safe experience at your office. That could lead to maybe bad PR, a bad review, or really just a breakdown in communication and misunderstanding. If somebody were to take the time and explain to me all of the different measures that the office was taking, and that I got all of that only for a $10 fee or a $20 fee, I would feel really good, and it would be value worth spending money on or investing in. And so this is where everything we do on a clinical aspect that rolls over into that marketing realm comes down to communication and how well are we communicating that value.
Absolutely. It all comes down to communication and communicating that value, and people can't buy what they don't see, right? So you need to help them see and visualize what you've been doing to keep them safe and justifying that fee. Absolutely. Well, we've been taking a look back at all of the different aspects of the 90-day recovery, practice recovery acceleration program, and boy, has there been a lot. If you think back to where you were week one, it was a whole different ball game. We wanted to kind of walk you through all the different areas that we have walked you through through these last 12 weeks so that you can really see the progress that you've made as a business owner, as a clinician, as a leader. So really in week one, we talked about our lines of defense. We encouraged you to, especially for that specific group of team members, to put them on temporary unemployment. We also talked to you about the process of starting to apply for the PPP loan. And I know that feels like it's old news now. However, at the time, it was very much what we were focused on, and getting through all that complicated road, if you will. We also talked about payment deferrals and contacting your lenders and your landlords and maybe helping them defer some payments. We also talked to you about maybe focusing on your interruption of business insurance if you had that, and if you could get any help that way. We also talked to you about if you had a line of credit to pull some of that money out just to give you a cushion if you needed it. Of course, paying no taxes. We all know that had been pushed out to the summer. We talked about, really, we gave you an Excel spreadsheet on developing a 90-day cash flow plan. So really taking a look at what was it going to cost me to keep my business open while really very few patients were coming in. Looked at different cash sources that might be available to you. We also talked a little bit about your emotional state management. If you can think back to that time, what was going on for us all personally, what was going on in the media, what was going on with our teams, our patients, our families. Emotional state management was essential during that time. Of course, it's been essential during the whole time. In the beginning, though, we really talked to a lot of you, and it was some difficult coaching conversations. So looking at leadership within a crisis just elevates who you naturally are. So if you naturally were a great leader, you continue to be a great leader. If you naturally came from abundance, you continue to come from abundance. We also encourage you to have that personal connection with your patients and your team, and really cherishing that culture that you've worked so hard to develop. Then in week 2, we really went into systems and focusing on the team. We walked you through creating a virtual team meeting and doing that on Zoom and figuring out what's been done, or communicating to your team what already had been done, so they knew that you were taking precautions to keep the practice going. Also, we discussed maybe what the opening day would look like. Of course, the opening day spanned a couple different weeks depending on what state you were in. However, it was important for you to start planning that and really focusing on the why. We talked about having conversations around childcare options, and the PPE conversation was starting back in week 2, talking to you about procuring the right PPE, figuring out what was going to be needed, especially for your local and state regulations, what your supply inventory was. Maybe taking a look then also, if you had some time, to take a look at your fee schedules and your patient service reviews. Of course, we had you focus on your accounts receivable. This was a time you were never going to get where you didn't have any more production that you were doing, but you had time to actually collect on all of your accounts receivable, both patient and insurance. We did lots of account cleanup. Maybe we even take a look at our team. Do we need to upgrade our team, and what that was going to look like? Then in week 3, we really started talking to you about the 3 roles that, of course, Jennifer on this call and on other calls, we've dove real in deep to this leadership, the CEO, and the clinical director roles. We took a look at, being vulnerable and building up safety within your team, establishing purpose, looking at it, the power of routine. You're typically so used to a routine all the time, you really had to create that for yourself. And we really focused on what you can control. We looked at different staggered scheduling and different steps you can take to triage your schedule, triaging your team, triaging your patients, taking a look at the new scheduling to goal. And then even more cash flow forecasting and what that was going to look like. We also talked to you a little bit about teledentistry and how you can incorporate teledentistry during this time, which could end up being something that you use in the future. And of course, your pre-rinse prevention and the suggested PPE that you would possibly be using as you're using it now. Week number 4, expect for the best, plan for the worst, organize for the future. Really talk to you a lot about different types of inspirational resources that you could, for yourself and for your team, looking at reopening, what that was going to look like. We looked at the 4 behaviors from the Harvard Crisis Leadership. So decide with speed over precision. We talked a little bit about this earlier in this call. Adapt boldly, as Jennifer talked about. So we've got to have speed and precision in your making decisions, adapting boldly. We also talked about reliably deliver. So people want to hear what you're going to do, and then you've got to deliver on what you said you were going to do. And then, of course, engage for impact. making sure that you're impacting the team and the patients around you. Boy, we talked about a communication guide, different ways you can communicate with your team, or I'm sorry, with your patients, excuse me. Email, phone, verbal, in person, all of these different ways to engage our patients. We also talked about sourcing and accountability, and we really shifted the sourcing and accountability. So you'd had source leaders in different areas, like an OSHA source leader and a compliance source leader and a financial source leader. And we also looked at our merchant services accounts and making sure that we could do sort of touchless payments and things like that. Lots and lots of things that we've talked about. We also helped you develop a training day so you can train on our new protocols before we opened up, and really doing that dress rehearsal. Week 5 was the Road to Recovery Hygiene Edition. So this was a great webinar where we brought on our Director of Hygiene Mastery, Shannon Richkowski, and she really talked about the different roles, the roles that the hygienist always takes and the roles that the hygienist has in this crisis. We talked about the 3 roles of a hygienist, in that them seeing themselves as a leader and a business person within your business, and of course a clinical director of the hygiene team. We talked about our 3 different levels of exams, which you may or may not be still practicing. Really important that we had you focus on different ways we could lessen the amount of PPE usage by looking at those 3 levels. And we also looked at the hygiene flow and levels of services, the co-discovery process, different types of, looked at the hand instrumentation, the 20-20-20 guide, looking at those 60 minutes and dividing that up amongst the different areas that the hygienist walks the patient through. And then pre-appointing with value. And we also looked at myth busters. So we busted some myths that were out there, and Shannon did a beautiful job of that. And if you haven't watched that, definitely go back and watch that, because at any time, actually, that is a great webinar for you and your hygienist to go through. And then with week 6, we looked at utilizing emotions and emotional intelligence. And we really talked to you a little bit about, this, of course, this leadership conversation with having agility, or we called it fortune agility. And this was also the time we brought in the 4th role of the doctor. So if we have the CEO, the leader, and the clinical director, the 4th role is really the human being. And the human being meaning you, doctor, and also the team members that are in your practice, and of course the patients. We really talked a lot about coaching, and coaching on a deeper level, and getting in touch with naming your emotions and being able to get through some of those emotions, because it was a roller coaster the last couple of months, several weeks. We also talked about getting information from reliable sources, because we know there was so much information out there. We really needed to hone in on what was really true and what was really important for us to know at the moment. We talked about some very, very powerful questions with a woman named Katie Byron and the work, and the amygdala hijack and emotional mirroring, and really being able to mirror emotionally what the patient was going through and asking them some real powerful questions, so we could practice a lot of empathy with our patients, because we never knew what they were going through. So there was a key communication technique that we taught during that call. There was a lot those first 6 weeks. So Jennifer, you want to tell us what happened the last 6 weeks of the program?
I know. So week 7 was our halftime review, and we definitely reviewed a lot of the key metrics, learning how to benchmark your CEO KPIs, your leadering indicators, as we called them, the clinical director accelerators. We brought up 3 ways to grow a business. We were daring enough to ask you the question, what if 2020 was your best year yet? And many of you said, oh my God, I'm already planning for 25% to 40%, off my mark from last year. Well, us coaches, being good coaches we are, we were not willing to accept that. So we basically looked at your 2019 reports, and we're going to bring also what you did already in 2020. And in this coming week, we're actually going to discover that in just a few minutes here. and figuring out where that gap is. But this is where in week 7, we actually did the pre-work for week 12. So excited to get to that. We looked at, ways to increase your patients, increase frequency, and increase more per visit. We worked on optimizing culture, and we teed you up for the phases of enrollment, which led us into week 8. Week 8, we focused on the first phase of enrollment, which was patient engagement. We created a pretty large, extensive patient engagement guide to make sure that you understood all the different ways of filling a patient funnel in your practice. And the phases of influence with the patient engagement really started with that culture calibration, making sure that your team was all on the same page when it came to communicating in all the different ways. We then went into week 9, which was phase 2 of the phases of influence, patient experience. So if you got them engaged with your practice, now once they were inside the practice, it was our turn to wow them. So we went through the 8 steps to 5-star service, which some of you had gone through before, but now through the lens of COVID, realized that there were some alterations that we had to do. We couldn't ignore their physical space, for instance, and having chairs stacked up to the ceiling would not necessarily be acceptable. So we also challenged you to look for opportunities with mergers and acquisitions. We introduced to you a pretty extensive guide with that on exactly how to do it. And we've had engaged in many conversations with you that are pretty exciting to get you to the opportunity of maybe growing your business pretty substantially without the risk. Then we went into week 10 on the final phase of the phases of influence, which was treatment acceptance, which we broke into 2 parts. The first one was really about understanding and reconnecting with the relationship with patients. We knew that if treatment acceptance kind of came from influence, influence is really the relationship. So understanding what specifically had changed for your patients during this time and what they may need from you as a healthcare provider that they may not have needed in the past. We visualized the gap that was really happening when a patient walked into the office. They were one place and we were on the other, and we needed to be able to meet the patient wherever they were in order to move them in the way of influence to understanding what they really wanted from us. On the second part of that, we dove deep into the core values and discovering the patient's dental values and their rules for those values. We went through the 5 steps of enrollment and understanding that today, taking the time to go through each step is so critical. No step can be missed. And now we're here today. And week 12 is really understanding the important decisions that we continue to make that really shape our future. We know leadership is everything. It is really the difference between that ordinary practice and the extraordinary practice. Change leadership and helping you guide your organization from the inside out is going to continue to be necessary. Now we've come to creating your game plan. Where do you go from here? So like I said, we pulled some reports. We did our work back in week 7 to kind of set it up for today, week 12, which is where us as Kim and I and Dennis and the people that you've gotten to know over the last 12 weeks are kind of going to leave you, but not for long. We now have your coaches coming in a more personal role to say they're taking the charge now to leading your mid-year annual plan. And you may see one number on the annual plan that is created, but we're here to tell you it doesn't mean it's the number it will end up being. 2 things that we have said. One is that you don't have to necessarily be the most productive this year as far as your top line numbers. However, being highly profitable this year is actually in reach. We have been given a true gift in the United States of that PPP, where in other countries, in the UK and Canada, are pretty envious of that. You guys, in most cases, have been given, 1 to 2 months of overhead paid for that really helped your cash position and where you are. So as getting started, what you see on the screen now, we're calling it closing the gap, which is really we've created a monitor that resembles your annual plan that we took you through in the fall of last year or even early first quarter. And it's plugging in the numbers that you already did from January to June and looking at from July to December, what can be done. So there's obviously a gap for where I am now and where I want to be, and how do we make that real in scheduling? And from there, now we're going to go ahead and go into scheduling to goals so that everybody is coming from a mode of proactivity versus reactivity. We're looking ahead in the schedule versus dealing with whatever's coming at us at the moment, and really reserving our energy for the right things. We don't want to be a bunch of chickens with our heads cut off and going around like, oh, we're so busy, but at the end of the day, we didn't necessarily produce or have the output result that we wanted. So closing the gap is really about visualizing where we're at right now and what needs to be done for the future. So as you can see on that screen, your coach will work with you specifically on designing a team meeting where everybody is involved in the plan. And this is a conversation first for your coach and you as the practice owner to do the hard numbers so that you feel really confident in the plan that you are going to create with your team, showing them what's possible. And so you're going to plug in what your goal was for annual planning of last year that would be for this year. You're going to put in your actual from January to June. And now you're going to come up with a gap, and that gap is then going to be illustrated how many working days do we have to do to make it up, and also what is our daily goal that has to be attached to that. Now, one way, if your goal seems to be pretty high and historically you've never reached that before, would be, well, maybe we need to add a few more days to the schedule. That's one way, but there's also several other solutions that your coach will work with you on to say, what are the other ways that we can be worth more per hour? What are the ways that we can utilize technology or bring in more team members to support us with? What are ways that we can really strategize on our fee schedules and being better at maybe reassess our relationships with some of our third-party payers, such as insurance. All of these are strategy conversations that mid-year is very appropriate to have. So we look forward to you going through this process as well as with your team. It also should not be neglected, the conversation of WIFM, what's in it for me? Your team should know, and you need to be prepared to ask, that if they go to these great lengths and they make these goals, what is in it for them in addition to their salary? Bring up the bonus conversation, bring up BAM. Maybe BAM's been something not necessarily achievable or been difficult. This gives you a fresh, new, clean slate to be able to put that in priority and say, we're gonna go after this and we're setting up the stakes to make it happen. So now's that time. The second monitor that we want to introduce to you to kind of leave you with is we've been talking about the hygiene opportunity monitor. We know that by taking 3 months off or 2 months off, or maybe it was only 6 weeks, there were a certain amount of recall patients that did not get scheduled forward. And if you go ahead and you look in your schedule and you look specifically in the weeks of September and October and November, you may see some holes or what we are transforming into opportunities. Not to be alarmed, most every practice in America has this. However, what they are doing to address this is really important. And so we've designed a monitor to support you and your team to making sure that those opportunities are all filled, and it's no big deal. So what that looks like is you're going to go through and you're going to actually assess the damage. We want to see how bad is it and then design a plan to fix it, because it is totally fixable, especially this early in the game. We have a lot of eligible patients that we can fill into that. So have somebody, your hygiene source leader, go ahead and go through the schedule and put in all the opportunities starting from September 14th all the way through November or December, to say, where are we light in the schedule? Put a number on it. If it's 20 opportunities that week, put 20 down. If it's 40, put 40 down. Whatever it may be, put what the real one is. And then every week, that hygiene source person is responsible for then going in and updating the tally, updating the total. And what will have happened week by week is that you'll be pulling the reports to see who are all the eligible patients, and now putting all the energy and resources into contacting these patients to get them scheduled. So once you've done that, then every week we're celebrating the progress. We're celebrating the wins that we were able to fill in those opportunities. This is a way to chunk it down into a very manageable pace so that in a few weeks, you will have made a huge dent in those missed opportunities, and to make sure that we are optimizing all of our hygiene goals and productivity. Kim, what would you add to this conversation?
Well, you did a beautiful job of explaining it. The only thing that I would add is that make sure the source person is announcing to the whole team how many of those appointments were filled, and celebrate, because this is going to be something you're really going to be having to focus on. So doctors, please ask your source people how many appointments were filled, and you want to watch that bar graph go down. And it's a great, when you get this Excel spreadsheet, you'll be able to see when you put the numbers in, the graphs goes down, and you can celebrate. And in this case, the graph going down is good because it means fewer openings, right? And really get excited about what you're able to accomplish.
Awesome. Very cool. All right. In our final week of deliverables, we will give you a week 12 checklist to round things out. You'll get the semi-annual planning builder as well as the hygiene opportunity monitor. And you'll also connect with your coach to go through the last few months on what has been accomplished, what maybe is still in progress, and what are some things that we need to maybe haven't addressed yet, but are still on the plans too. I think it's really important for us to hit pause for a second and just look back. For some of you, the last 3 months have been an utter blur, and we need to bring some clarity on everything that you've done. And for others, it's flown by or been painfully slow. I'm not so sure where you are in the spectrum, but it's good to reflect. And as we move, we'll end the way that we always have, which is the crisis equals risk and opportunity. We definitely believe that the opportunities at this point well outweigh the risk. And we want to congratulate you for that, because you've gotten yourselves to this position where you are in a very powerful position where you are looking for the opportunities and you're not so threatened by the risk. I think there's a lot of risk that you could pull out, but I think there's way more opportunities. And the risk would be, don't let this momentum end. You have accomplished more in the last 3 months than most practices do in a year. And that truly makes you an extraordinary practice. And the risk would be to slow it down to a point, or maybe be careful of, we spend a lot of time of guarding your brain and guarding your ears of where you are getting your information. As the industry starts to evolve, the average practice are doing different things that aren't getting them to the results that you are. Don't be subject to that. Don't become, a victim to the majority, if you will. You guys have done an amazing job, and we are so proud of the progress that you have. Continue to chase the opportunities. Continue to be extraordinary. And we will finish on the last slide, as we always do, which is the law of attraction. We do believe that where you got today was because of this. The attention and the energy and the focus that you had on making a bounce back recovery, being better than you ever were, and really aiming to create the best year you've ever had will come true with putting that attention, energy, and focus on it. We have been very pleased and privileged to guide you through this process, and we look forward to hearing about your goals towards the end of the year and hearing all the success stories. We've heard a lot of them, and keep them coming, definitely. And we will continue to be your guiding compass and your true north throughout these processes. So with that, Kim, do you have anything else you want to add to them?
It's truly been an honor to walk you all through this. As Jennifer said, go out there and do great things with your patients and your team. Be a leader.
Awesome. With that, we bid you adieu, and we'll say see you later, because we'll be looking forward to some progress reports coming our way. So take care, and make it a great day.